If you're a parent of a child with autism, then you will be familiar with meltdowns, which are perhaps one of the biggest struggles with autism. Now, what is a meltdown? How is it different from a tantrum? Because I think a lot of people, especially people passers-by in the street, can see a child having an autism meltdown and think it's a tantrum when we know it's totally different. So we're going to talk today about how a meltdown is different from a tantrum, and we're going to look at some ways that meltdowns can be prevented, and I'm going to share with you some strategies that I use with my children to help navigate through meltdowns and ultimately make the child and everyone in the family a lot calmer and happier. If you're new around here, hi, my name is Rhiannon Morgan. Welcome to the Real Talk with Rhi podcast, where we talk about all things trying to get organised, mum life, parenting neurodivergent children, and in fact, realising that a lot of us, me included, have ADHD, which is perhaps why we need to do the getting organised thing as well. So if you want to hear a lot more about that, I'd love it if you would subscribe if you're here on YouTube, or what do we do on actual podcasts? We subscribe over there if we're listening on the podcast channel. I guess we do. So if you're listening to me in the audio format, then you can subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. But if you want to comment and engage with what we're chatting about today and kind of be a part of the community, have a little bit of a say, then make sure you're commenting on the YouTube video version, which you can find just by searching Real Talk with Rhi on YouTube, unless of course you're already on YouTube, in which case, hi, hello. Anyway, let's get to it. So ultimately, let me just preface this by saying I am not a doctor. I am a mother of 4 children, all of which have autism. And one of the biggest things that I've learnt is, although autism is a broad term for describing a set of conditions or struggles, each child, or adult for that matter, is going to struggle with each particular challenge in their own way and to more or less of a degree. So each individual child will have their own specific set of struggles and levels with each specific struggle. And therefore, each of the strategies I'm going to suggest are going to work with varying degrees of success for different children. But ultimately, they're also going to work with various degrees of success at each given time with each child. So perhaps something that works with a child one day won't do so well another day. But this is why we like to have things in our toolkit. We like to have lots of different options, lots of different things that we can do, that we can try to help our children feel more regulated, feel more happy, feel calmer. So just because you've tried one of these things once, maybe it doesn't work, it's still worth perhaps trying things again in a different situation. But it really is a kind of like a buffet, a toolkit of picking what works for you and leaving what doesn't. Now, obviously, the very first thing we want to do is ideally avoid meltdowns altogether. That's the absolutely ideal situation, isn't it? Because prevention is better than cure. And if you are a parent of a child with autism, you'll know that once that kind of meltdown has started, if you don't catch it in time, it gets trickier and trickier to deal with. So each child will have their own very specific early warning signs that a meltdown is coming. And these are things that you'll learn to be really tuned into as a parent. It is the kind of thing that's sometimes worth noting down, definitely if your child's going through the autism assessment process, because these things are definitely worth discussing during your child's assessment. But also, it's worth noticing specific triggers and things just for your own family to be aware of them, so certain situations can be avoided. Now, I do have a resource for you, which I just wish someone had given me something like this when my children were being assessed. And it's 100 different signs of autism, and it's a printable, and you can just go through. And honestly, when my children were being assessed, one of the biggest struggles I think that I faced during the assessment process was not realizing that certain things were autism things. I thought they were just things, or just my children things, or just all children things for that matter, because ultimately I've only had children with autism, so that's all I know. So I didn't necessarily know what to be looking out for as kind of warning signs, or not warning signs so much as from an assessment point of view, as indicators. But equally, some of these indicators can give you a hint at what your child might struggle with, and therefore help you to navigate the environment and your children's lives so that they're going to struggle a lot less. So if you want to go to the URL that is on screen if you're watching on YouTube, but I will put it down in the description of both the video and the podcast episode. So that's mummyoffour.com/100ASD, and I will send you that printable PDF and also some videos that I think are really going to help you in your journey. So ultimately, identifying your child's own triggers, you can use that PDF for some ideas of what the kind of things they might struggle with. And there are sort of two phases to this, actually, so we're going to rewind a little bit. So there are things that your specific child might be triggered by. So for example, this isn't necessarily an autism thing, but it's definitely a Zara thing, who's our youngest. She has this, it goes as far as say, as a phobia of dogs. She had a couple of negative experiences where we were walking, I guess it was probably lockdown times when everyone was walking all the time. And there were a couple of dogs off the lead. The owners were not being very responsible with them, and they kind of bounded up to her. She was very tiny, and it was a very frightening experience. It would be like a horse or something charging at my face, if you think of, size comparison. Yeah, I could see that would be a bit tricky and a bit scary. So she's now really scared of those things. So now when I see a dog that is either off a lead or on a very long lead that I know that might make her anxious, I clock that ahead of time, and then I can preempt that she may need support. So one of the things I'll do is, before she sees the dog, I'll switch her hand, the one she's walking on, so that I am between her and the dog. So the dog is not going to be as close to her. So these are just very small things that you can kind of clock and spot as a parent, and then sort of just intervene and steer away. Now, I'm not suggesting that we can protect our children from everything that may upset them ever, as much as I'd love to. And I know I've had comments before going, well, what good is it just protecting them from things because therefore they're not going to learn as an adult? Well, the idea is we can nurture them through these things rather than just sort of exposure therapy. I think we're past the days of, I think when my husband was taught to swim, they just would push him and they just pushed him in the pool. And, they're like, well, there you go, learn to swim. We don't do that anymore. It's more like, let's teach you strategies of, how to swim. And it's very much the same way that I see helping my children navigate the challenges with autism. Ultimately, we want to minimize the struggles they're exposed to, but then things that they're going to be exposed to as they get older, to introduce those slowly and with strategies, so that when they are, walking around the world on their own as adults, they have those strategies in place that they have been incrementally introduced to. So what would you say your child's big triggers are? They could be certain sensory things. They could be, like loud noises, very flashy lights. We'll get on to some things that we can do to sort of get around these and help the children with these. But identifying the triggers is absolutely number one. Make a list of the things that your child struggles with, and just kind of keep those top of mind as you're out and about in certain environments. Then if you know what they're going to find challenging, you're going to know quicker when they may need a bit of extra support. And when they get that support, the meltdown is less likely to explode to a stage where you're kind of past the point of no return, which I think we've all been at some point if we're parenting children with autism. So the second thing to notice in the noticing and the prevention stage is when your child is struggling, they will likely have tells, if you're talking in kind of poker terms. And these things may be super subtle. And I think this is where children like mine specifically, and I'm going to say girls, I know boys do it some to a degree, sometimes too, and you can't generalize, but largely this is a problem for girls because of masking. So girls, specifically in school, my girls are far less likely to mask at home, but specifically in school, they will come across a challenge and kind of stuff it in, and they won't show that they're struggling. And then the teachers who don't know the tells or if they don't know the tells, don't notice that they're struggling and then are not able to intervene and help. However, even a child that is masking will have tells, and if your children are like mine, they're far more likely to mask out and about than they are at home. But if you can spot those tells to show that they're struggling, to show that they're anxious, you can intervene nice and early and avoid that point of no return moment. So tells may include extra stimming, extra, tapping or jittering, or whatever your child's stimming activity is. It might just be that their face becomes tense, which is kind of one for my children. They kind of, I can't even describe it, sort of just like the muscles in their face become really tense and they become really like they're physically trying to hold it together. For our youngest, her eyebrows change. Her eyebrows change shape, and when she's starting to struggle with things, maybe their breathing gets faster. And these tells are going to be so specific to your child. But if you can spot those, and that can be that kind of early warning sign that they need help, then you can intervene, you can help them and stop the meltdown a little bit quicker. Helpful strategy for preventing meltdowns is just using visual timetables. Sometimes the issue with a meltdown can be because your child was not expecting what was coming up. I definitely find my children with autism respond so much better to everything if they know what's coming. So this can look like, for very small children, pictures. As your children get older, you can just use a shared calendar. So we actually have a shared Apple calendar, and I put all the family events on, and the children know what's coming next. A timer to let them know how much time is going on or going to pass before an activity switch can really help avoid meltdowns. So time timers are amazing, which are kind of like a very visual egg timer, which you can physically see the numbers going down. This can really help children because ultimately, if they are doing something like playing and you ask them to stop and they don't know how much time they've got, and then suddenly they're just instantly asked to stop and they haven't got that time to transition from one activity to another, that's very much likely to cause a meltdown. And obviously another common trigger can be actual physical things, such as being overtired, being over hungry, being overstimulated, or actually just coming down with something. All of these things can kind of lower, everyone's reserves and tolerance, I suppose, but mean that a child with autism might be that little bit closer to having a meltdown. So it's worth looking out for all of those things, because those things can in most cases be quite easily fixed with making sure there's plenty of routine, that they're eating at regular intervals, they're drinking plenty, they're sleeping enough, and at the same time every day. Because ultimately leaning you into routine works so well for children with autism. And then when there are going to be changes to that routine, to notify them and let them know so that they can feel more comfortable and, again, avoid meltdowns. So when you are thinking, right, a meltdown's coming or a meltdown is here, what can you do as a parent to help support your child? Now, the first thing you need to do is nothing to do with your child, actually, is to do with yourself, and just have a really quick check-in and be like, right, okay, we're dealing with a meltdown here. My panicking or getting stressed out is not going to help this. It's going to make it worse. It's going to take it the other way. So really, the best thing you can do is be a calming presence. Now, I'm aware this is easier said than done. I know from personal experience this is easier said than done. And sometimes I manage this much better than others. But ultimately, if your child's stress is elevating and going up, and you can bring your levels down in a calming way, you can be that calming influence in the situation. Your mind's going to be clearer anyway when it's calm, when you're not hyper stressed, your blood's not being flooded with stress chemicals. Your mind is going to be clearer and better able to look for solutions. So if you can just do what you can, so maybe this is like, right, take a breath, right, I'm acknowledging this is what we're doing now. Okay, we want my child to calm down, so I've got to stay calm. The next thing that you can do is perhaps switch up location if you are noticing a meltdown happening, or if a meltdown is happening. Sometimes something as simple as switching up what's happening, taking a breather, taking a break, having a little time out from whatever's happening can really help. So one of the big things, I think we talked about it last week on the podcast, one of the big struggles for my children with autism is homework and perfectionism. And I know that this is a time that can potentially cause meltdowns. because it has done so many times. So what we like to do is kind of keep an eye on how things are going. Homework, as a specific example, we try and do as soon in the week as possible, leaving as much time for things to be left and gone back to as possible. Because if a meltdown is happening, continuing to pursue doing the same thing and expecting a different result, it's just not going to work. So sometimes it can be a case of, right, we're going to take a break from this, we're going to do something else, we're going to come back to it. Sometimes we're going to take a break from it and we're going to start the same activity but in a different room, because that feels like a fresh space and a fresh energy. Sometimes it can be, let's do some breathing exercise and go back to it. Sometimes it's a case of we need to scrap this for the day and we need to do it another day. And ultimately, it's up to you to notice your child and to see which one they're going to respond to. Now, what you might find is if the meltdown's gone far enough, you sort of hit a bit of an impasse where your child doesn't want to stop but doesn't want to continue. And we've been there so many times, which is why the earlier you can notice these things, the earlier you can notice the struggle, the easier it's going to be to help them and ultimately fix it at the right time. That's not necessarily the right word, but help them, to guide them back out of a meltdown into a state of feeling nice and calm and happy again. There can be non-verbal support that you can offer your children. So this can just be like being physically close. Maybe they like to be stroked. Maybe they like to be held. Some children with autism like to be held very tightly. And this could either be physically or with a weighted blanket. And this kind of helps suppress their nervous system a little bit and physically helps them kind of release the overwhelm that they are feeling. Because ultimately, I think the biggest difference that I would say between a meltdown and a tantrum in my experience is, if you take the example of a child that wants a bag of sweets, and if this child's like, I want the bag of sweets, and you say, like, you can't have a bag of sweets because we're going to have dinner or whatever. And if a child's having a tantrum, they're like, I want that sweets. And they are physically doing things to try and get a reaction out of you. And generally, although I would not advise this, if you then give in to said tantrum and say, here are the sweets, a tantrum will stop almost instantly. You'll be like, gone. I got what I wanted. And then obviously if you keep doing that, that'll reinforce the behaviour again. Tantrums get them what they wanted. So it's not advisable. However, with a meltdown, if a child is melting down over, let's just take the bag of sweets example again. And let's just say that they wanted one sweet and you said, no, look, it's too close to dinner now. And then they get into this meltdown state. Chances are, first of all, it's not about the sweet anyway. It's probably about the build-up, the stuff that's happened all day. But if this child is having a meltdown as opposed to a tantrum, and you're like, oh, fine, forget it. You can have the sweet, you can have a whole bag of sweets, you can have a whole sweet shop. When they've reached that point of no return, it's like nothing can calm them down because the overwhelm has taken over. The emotions are too big, and even giving them the thing that they thought they wanted at the beginning isn't going to fix it, which is why we need to go through all of these strategies to help them calm down and feel safe and relaxed again. So taking your child into a different physical space can help. I use this as a homework example, but this can really be for anything at all. And definitely if one of the reasons that your child is melting down is because you're in a crowded or loud environment, finding a physically quieter, safer space is probably going to help a lot, because obviously the sensory stuff is going to add to the overwhelm. Now, I know a lot of children with autism wear ear defenders. Our youngest, Zara, didn't used to wear, none of my children used to wear ear defenders at all. And then literally towards the end of last year has become more of a user of ear defenders, and she's been relying on them more, and that's fine. That works for her. It's funny, it's like certain noises, certain pitches don't bother her at all. Other noises, other pitches really do bother her. And again, I guess this is another example really of prevention is better than cure. If your child is going to need ear defenders, to give them to them in certain situations. But equally, if your child is having a meltdown, introducing ear defenders and saying, look, perhaps we can have these to kind of block out and try and recenter, that can really help at times. Like I said, I mean, all of these things are very much, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And often I just go through, I'm like, right, try this, didn't work. Okay, try this, didn't work, try that. Tapping is a really, really great one. So there are loads of videos on this. Let me know if you want me to do a more specific version of this, but it's called Emotional Freedom Technique, and it's tapping on meridian points. And I don't fully understand the science of this, but apparently there's bits of this, and it's along the lines of kind of the reflexology and various sort of things, school of thought. But if you look up EFT tapping, or I will put a very good video actually down, I will link it in the accompanying blog post. So EFT tapping, just very briefly, obviously apologies if you are listening, you can't actually see me, but if you're watching on YouTube, so when you tap on various places, including the side of the hand, and then there are places on your face and your eyebrows, on your chin, I think the collarbone, like where your bra would be, and top of your head, and you do these tapping, you do this sequence, you keep doing it and keep doing it. And what it does, it can be used for anyone, any stressful situation, but if you rate your level of stress at the beginning of this tapping, and then you go through this sequence, you keep going through it and go through it. If you rate your level of stress at the end, your number will be lower. I don't fully understand how it works. I just know that it does. There are entire channels that just talk about EFT. So definitely sort of do a bit of research, try it out. But definitely any of these strategies that you would like to use with your children, I'd highly recommend having a practice with them when they are feeling calm anyway, because at the point of meltdown, they're very unlikely to want to learn a new skill. And if you have practiced something over and over and it's become habit, I guess it's like karate. My children do karate, and although they are encouraged not to, use karate in school or whatever, and that they're only allowed to use it for self-defense, the whole point of karate, from what I can gather, is to learn things so that they become kind of second nature. So if someone was to attack you, you just automatically block. I don't know, I don't do karate, I just watch my children do it. There'd be certain things you'd automatically do that are like a reflex, and they're so second nature that it comes quite naturally. Like driving. When I first started driving, I was like, how am I ever going to remember all this? Like, press pedal, do this. But now you just get in the car and do it. So if you do tapping with your children on a regular basis, when they actually need it, it's not going to be this difficult thing to have to follow. It's going to feel quite second nature. But equally, as long as they've had a go at it before, you could put a video on or go through it with them, and it's definitely a technique that works incredibly well for calming down children. Another one's rainbow breathing. Now, I used this when I was in labour, and it was great. It worked really, really well. And all you do for this is you pick something for every colour of the rainbow, and I used it as contractions were coming, and by the time I got to the end of the rainbow, the contractions were gone, so I thought that was a winner. But basically, so you think red, so all mine seem to be fruit, but strawberries, I'm like, red. Breathe in strawberries, and then you just breathe out the colour red and the smell of strawberries. So you're breathing in, imagine the smell, breathing out, and then orange. I guess we got oranges, and you go, breathe in the smell, hold, visualise the oranges, visualise the smell, and exhale. Then you go through the rest of the colours of the rainbow. Some of the colours are easier to think of things than others. But ultimately, this does a few different things. It focuses the child's mind on something else. So it's focusing on visualising the colours. And it also slows and steadies their breathing, because you get a big deep breath in and out. And breath work can just be so helpful for calming anyone down. So if a child's having a meltdown, then obviously this is really, really helpful. There may be certain songs, audiobooks that they find really comforting that you can play to them, which they associate with being really calm, and this can be introduced. It's the kind of thing that maybe you could have on your phone, a favourite song, or an audiobook that they really, really love, and you could play that and they can focus on that rather than whatever it was that they were melting down about. Certain scents can actually help. So my children, we went into Lush to look for, it was like a lavender spray, a pillow spray, or a sleep spray or something. So I went in asking for that years ago because it had been recommended to me. And the lady in the shop said, oh, well, you could try that. But you know what I like even more? It's this, and it's called Rose Jam. And it is a body spray, but she said you can spray it on pillows and fabrics and things. And honestly, it smells amazing. So I often spray this on the girls' pillows or on their bunnies, which are obviously another massive source of comfort. A physical thing that they find comforting, like a soft toy or a blanket, can obviously really, really help. But if they've got a certain scent that they associate with being relaxed, then spraying some of that can obviously help them in that situation. Because the way our minds work, from what I can remember from my psychology A level, it's basically that our minds group like memories together. So I think we've all been there where you've smelt a certain smell you haven't smelled, and you're like, oh my gosh, it takes me back to being a teenager when I was at so and so, so and so. And certain smells evoke certain memories, certain songs evoke certain memories. And if we can anchor certain smells, sounds, textures to memories of being calm, we can utilize this for our children in order to help them get back to that calm state where ultimately, even if they don't realize it at the time, I'm sure they'd prefer to be. Obviously, it's really important to acknowledge your child's feelings. And growing up, born in the 80s and as a child of the 90s, obviously that's not something that happens much back then, but now we are trying to do this with our children. But just kind of saying to them, look, I understand how you're feeling. I understand how you're feeling. I'm here. Reassuring them that they're seen, their feelings are valid. You know, it's very tempting to be like, you know, obviously, you know, the dog's not going to hurt you, whatever. But if you take the Zara example, that fear is very real in her. It's like, I understand that this worries you a lot. However, I want you to know that although this is a big feeling and although I acknowledge this is how you feel, I want you to know that you're safe. I want you to know that I'm here. I want you to know that I'm going to keep you safe and, you know, talk them through it slowly and steadily. Keep reassuring that you're there. You're not going to leave them. That you are going to be there with them to help them. There have been so many times where I have been sat on the floor with my children. I just feel that, you know, you can try all the different strategies and, you know, my children have poppets, for example, and that's good for self-regulation, for teaching them if they're feeling stressed when they're in school. They use the little fidget toys and things. And all this is great. And ultimately, when I'm not there with them, I'm hoping that they've learned they think of some of the techniques that they use the rainbow breathing, they use the tapping, and hopefully this will be the way they cope with things when they're older and they're an adult and I'm not there with them every single day because, you know, they're adults and they're doing their things. But ultimately now, while they are children, I feel like my job is to just be this steadying presence and be like, I'm here with you during this meltdown. Nothing's going to stop me loving you. Everything's fine. I'm here for whatever you need. We're going to try this. We're going to try tapping. And sometimes my children get really annoyed when I ask them to try tapping. Sometimes it works. Other times, whatever happens, it's like, look, I'm here. If you need me to hug you, I'm here. If you need me to give you some space, I am still here. I'm giving you some space, but I'm still here when you need me. And just kind of reassuring them that whatever is happening, everything is figure outable. Love that book by Marie Forleo. I could do an entire episode about that. Maybe I will. But everything is figure outable. And you are there, you are that steadying force for them, and things are going to be all right. Now, post-meltdown, often children can kind of go through this, or I've noticed this kind of transition phase where they're no longer melting down, but they're not really out of it yet. And this is a good time to be really reassuring. And sometimes they can feel like they have done things wrong. They can potentially feel apologetic, and this is a time that I like to talk to them and say, well, look, perhaps it wasn't the kindest thing to say that to your sister or whatever happened, but equally we know that you didn't mean it and you couldn't help it. It was, you know, part of the meltdown. It doesn't make you a bad person just because you said an unkind thing. So what we can do is acknowledge what was said. Perhaps one of the things you said during those meltdowns to your sister was not the kindest thing. Perhaps we should apologise for that. That's fine. But equally, we don't need to feel bad about it. Don't need to make it mean anything about ourselves. We just need to acknowledge that everyone makes mistakes. Everyone, including grown-ups. I think this is something I didn't realise growing up. I used to think that like grown-ups didn't make mistakes, and that was quite a lot to live up to. I think it's important to let our children know that, you know, we all make mistakes. We all have moments of overwhelm. We all cope with them differently. But just because you have had this meltdown does not mean anything about you or make you a bad person. Ultimately, when they are right out of it and they've come out of this transition stage where they're still feeling quite stressed, it's potentially worth having a calm, cool conversation, maybe even the day after, about what do we think like may have triggered that? Which strategies could we use in the future when we feel this coming on? And even how does it feel in our bodies when we're starting to get stressed about things? It really helps to talk to the children about the way they explain it in the chimp paradox, which is amazing. There is a book, an adult book and a children's book for the chimp paradox. It just basically explaining, and again, I could talk about this for a whole episode, or maybe I will, but the chimp paradox basically explains that our subconscious mind, which is there to protect us. We've got our conscious mind where we consciously think, okay, I'm going to do this now, I'm going to do that now. Our thoughts. And that's our human brain. We've got our computer brain, which literally runs heart, digestion, all that kind of stuff, the totally automated stuff, the stuff that we don't think about, and it just happens in our bodies. And then we've got the chimp brain, which hasn't really evolved and is just trying to keep us safe. And sometimes we see things and our chimp brain is like, oh, danger, danger. And there's no real danger because our chimp brain doesn't realize that we live in a civilized modern society and actually there isn't real danger. So they think, the chimp brain, thinks that whatever's happening in our immediate environment is danger and a threat to our lives. And sometimes the chimp brain in a meltdown situation takes over and causes that meltdown because it's afraid and it's just trying to protect us. And when we talk about this, it's like, well, we can't really help it, but we can perhaps talk to our chimp brain and be like, do you know what? There's no danger. Calm down. Let's just sort of get back to thinking about things logically. And ultimately, if we talk to our children after they've had a meltdown about which signs they noticed initially in themselves, we can hopefully ultimately teach them to notice when they are feeling overwhelmed and to start to feel more regulated because they can start to put strategies into place themselves. And this is definitely something, as my children approach secondary school, one's in uni now, one's in secondary school. I've got 2 girls still in primary, ready to go, working way up to it. And I think it was a concern when they were going to secondary school that they weren't going to be like nurtured by this one teacher that knew them really well. They're going to have all these different teachers. And I knew they were going to have to be a little more self-reliant. Obviously, they've still got support because we have a good relationship with the school. They have a diagnosis, so there's support for them to access. But it's just a much bigger school, isn't it? It's a much bigger school, a lot more kids, a lot more teachers. So obviously the concerns are real. So one of the things that I've been trying to teach them is in a situation where they need something from me, I'm trying my best not to fully preempt and just jump in and do things for them. I'm trying to say to them, what do you need from me? Ask me for what you need. And my hope is that when they're having these feelings and they need, I don't know, maybe their pen's run out, they need another pen, or maybe they just need a break and they need fresh air, or whatever it is they need in that moment, because they're like, oh, I'm having these feelings, I need something. If they can have those skills to go, this is what I need, I'm going to ask for help from this, then they should hopefully be able to do that and ask for that help that they require from a teacher or a member of staff or whoever they are with when I'm not there. And hopefully that is a skill that we're working on. It's difficult for me as their mother to sit on my hands sometimes and just be like, what do you need from me? When I just want to jump in because I know exactly what they need. But trying to get them to use those skills, I think, is really, really beneficial. It's really important to kind of build your child's emotional vocabulary. And in fact, as adults, it's good for us to be able to do this, to be able to just identify how we're feeling is just such a massive one. Because if we can identify how we're feeling and we're not feeling great, and then we can think, okay, well, I'm not feeling great. Do I want to feel like this? No. What's making me feel like this? Okay, it's this. So if I don't want to feel like this, I'd like to feel better than this. What can I do? And if we can have that thought process going on in our minds before things escalate into being incredibly stressful and overwhelming, and this can go for autism meltdowns, or this can quite frankly just go for being an adult or just a human of any description for that matter. But if we can learn to name our feelings and decide, do I want to feel like this? What's making me feel like this? If I don't want to feel like this and I want to feel better, what can I do? And let's take those steps. Then we can all feel a lot happier, or most of the time. And obviously it's super important to engage the help of professionals wherever you can. So open, honest dialogues with your schools, the teachers, the support staff, things like that. If you know your child has certain tells, don't expect your child's teacher to be able to pick up on them. It's important to discuss these things in meetings and say, look, when she goes super quiet and her face looks really, really tense, she's struggling. You might not see it because you've got a class full of kids and she's not screaming and shouting. She just looks like she's being quiet, but she's struggling and I need you to help her. And then if you have that open, honest dialogue with the school, you've got that option for them to perhaps give them extra support in school. The biggest one that I'd say though is just getting the assessment in the first place to understand your child and so they can understand themselves. And I did do a really in-depth chat about should you get your child assessed for autism or not, and I have some hopefully very helpful insights on that. So if you click on the video on screen now, or I'll link the podcast episode below if you're listening, then you can check that out, or check out my Patreon, some early release videos, and I shall see you guys in the next one. Bye.